Soldiers of the realm, the hour of praying is here. March with me to victory.
She thought she married a man. Even the gods feared his strength. The grand hall of the celestial palace gleamed with light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Marble columns rose toward a ceiling painted with the history of 1,000 worlds, and the air itself shimmered with ancient magic. Princess Lyra stood at the center of the hall, wearing a dress of pure starlight that shifted colors with each breath she took. Her silver eyes, which had watched civilizations rise and fall across 10,000 years, were fixed on the entrance. The doors opened. A man walked in. He was not what she expected. Lyra had prepared herself for this moment, her entire immortal life. The council had arranged this marriage as a political necessity, a way to strengthen ties with the human colonies. She had imagined a nervous young man who would stare at her in fear and wonder, who would bow so deeply his forehead touched the ground, who would speak in whispers and feel honored to stand in her presence. Instead, Kale walked forward with steady steps. He wore a simple dark suit, nothing like the elaborate ceremonial robes the council had suggested. His eyes, brown and warm, not glowing with power, met hers directly. He did not bow. He did not fall to his knees. "Hello, Lyra," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I'm Kal-El. I'm glad to meet you." The entire hall fell silent. Attendants gasped. Ancient immortal beings who had served the royal family for centuries shifted uncomfortably. This human had broken protocol in the first 10 seconds. Lyra felt something unexpected. Curiosity. "You did not perform the greeting ritual," she said. Her voice like music played on silver strings.
"No," Kale agreed.
"I didn't. I figured we should talk like actual people instead of following a script neither of us wrote. Is that okay?" She studied him carefully. He was not tall by celestial standards, but he stood with a confidence that made him seem larger. His face was weathered in a way that suggested he spent time under real suns, not in the protected halls of station cities. His hands showed calluses, the marks of someone who actually worked, not someone who had servants do everything. "Tell me about yourself," Lyra said, gesturing toward the grand sitting area. They moved together, and Kale sat down without waiting for permission, as if they were equals. "There's not much to tell," he began. "I was born on Earth, the original human homeworld. I studied engineering and diplomacy. I've worked for the Earth Colonial Council for 15 years, and I was selected for this assignment because I understand both human and celestial cultures reasonably well." "And you do not fear me?" Lyra asked. "Should I?" Kale tilted his head slightly.
"You're powerful, certainly.
"But you're also just a person, like me. Different circumstances, longer life, more magic, but still a person with thoughts and feelings, and probably some doubts about whether this marriage was a good idea." Lyra felt something shift inside her. In her 10,000 years, no one had ever spoken to her this way. Everyone bowed. Everyone feared. Everyone wanted something from her or her power. "The council will be unhappy with your behavior," she warned. "Probably." Kal nodded. "But here's what I think. If we're going to do this, if we're going to represent a partnership between our species, then we should actually act like partners. Not like a goddess and a servant. Not like two species that barely tolerate each other. Actually like partners." Over the next few days, as the marriage ceremonies proceeded with their strange mixture of human and celestial traditions, Lyra found herself spending more and more time with Kale. He told her about Earth, a planet she had only read about in historical records. He described rain falling from clouds, the feeling of wind without artificial climate control, the chaos of billions of people building cities without magical assistance. "How did you survive without immortality?" she asked once. "How did you build anything that mattered if you knew you would die in just a few decades?" "Maybe that's exactly why we built things that mattered," Kale replied thoughtfully. "Because we knew time was limited. We couldn't wait for the perfect moment or the ideal solution. We had to start, and we had to finish within a lifespan we could actually experience." A week after the marriage, a diplomatic crisis emerged. A trade dispute between human colonies and celestial outposts threatened to escalate into actual conflict. The council met in emergency session, and Lyra was summoned to listen to their concerns and the various solutions proposed by ancient celestial lords who had handled 1,000 such situations before. Each solution involved celestial power dominating human interests. Each one assumed humans would simply accept whatever the immortals decided. The council turned to Kale, who had been allowed to observe. They expected him to accept their judgment quietly. Instead, he spoke up. "What if," he said slowly, "instead of one side winning and the other losing, we created a solution where both species actually learn something from each other? What if the humans taught the Celestials how we approach problems with limited resources, and the Celestials taught humans the long-term thinking that comes from immortality?" The council stared at him as if he had suggested something impossible. "That is not how negotiation works," an ancient celestial lord said coldly. "Actually," Kale continued, unintimidated by the power gathered around him, "it's the only way negotiation actually works long-term. You can force compliance, sure, but you can't force cooperation. And if you want humans and celestials to work together as partners, you need cooperation, not compliance." Lyra watched her new husband stand before her ancient family, unremarkable in every physical way. No glowing powers, no cosmic presence, just a mortal man with an idea. And she realized something that would change everything. He was not afraid because he had nothing to lose that mattered more than speaking the truth. The council dismissed him without accepting his proposal. But Lyra did not forget his words. 3 weeks after the diplomatic council meeting, Kael was walking through the lower gardens of the Celestial Palace when the first attacker appeared. He came without warning, a figure dressed in black armor that seemed to absorb light itself. The assassin moved with the fluid grace of someone trained for centuries in combat. He did not speak. He simply attacked, his weapon crackling with energy that could slice through reinforced steel. Kael had no powers. He had no magical defenses. What he had was something the assassin did not expect. He had been trained by humans who understood that power was not always about strength. The first attack came fast. A horizontal slash meant to cut Kael in half. Instead of meeting it head-on, Kael stepped sideways and backward simultaneously, using the assassin's own momentum against him. As the figure stumbled slightly, Kael grabbed a ceramic pot from the garden and threw it not at the assassin, but at the ground beneath his feet. The pottery shattered, creating a slippery surface. The assassin adjusted his footing instantly. He was too skilled to be caught by such a simple trick. But it had bought Kael 3 seconds. 3 seconds was sometimes enough. Kael ran, not in panic, but with purpose. He moved toward the palace's central courtyard, where there were people and witnesses. The assassin followed, his weapon blazing with energy that left scorch marks on the stone walls. In the courtyard, Kael suddenly stopped and turned to face his attacker directly. The assassin grinned, thinking his prey had finally surrendered. Instead, Kael pointed upward at the massive crystal chandelier hanging above them, an ancient artifact that held the palace's light magic. "That crystal draws power from the energetic lines in the floor," Kael said quickly, speaking to the guards who had appeared. "If someone strikes it with enough magical force, it might overload the entire system." The assassin hesitated for just a moment, realizing the trap. Kael had not been trapped at all. He had led his attacker to a location where using full power would be catastrophic for everyone, including the assassin himself. Lyra arrived moments later, moving faster than the eye could follow. She took in the scene instantly. The scorched walls, the nervous guards, her husband standing calmly in the center of it all with barely a mark on him. "Stand down," she commanded the assassin, her voice carrying the weight of divine authority. The figure in black armor lowered his weapon immediately. It took Lyra only hours to discover the truth. The attack had been ordered by the Celestial Council itself. It was a test, they claimed, a way to determine if Kael was truly worthy of marrying into the royal family. If he could not survive against a trained warrior, he did not deserve the title of princess's husband. Lyra found Kael in the library, calmly reading about celestial history. He looked up as she entered, unsurprised. "You knew," she said. "It was not a question. I suspected," Kael admitted. "The way that assassin fought, he was trained, but he wasn't trying to kill me efficiently. He was testing me, seeing how I would respond." A real assassin wouldn't have given me the time to use environmental tactics. He would have used overwhelming force immediately. And yet, you could have been killed, Lyra said, anger flashing in her silver eyes. A mistake, a moment of poor timing, and you would have died. But here's what your council didn't understand. I've been trained by a species that lives with mortality. We learn young that survival isn't about being stronger than everyone else. It's about being smarter, faster in thinking, better at reading situations. We don't have centuries to develop magical power, so we develop something else. People expected me to fight like a celestial warrior. Head on, using power against power. They assumed I would fail because I lack your strength. But I don't fight like that. I fight like a human. And humans have been solving problems bigger than themselves since we first walked upright on Earth. Lyra studied him carefully. His heart was beating faster than normal. He had been frightened during that encounter, despite his calm demeanor. But he had not panicked. He had thought clearly under pressure. "Why did you not fight back with more force?" she asked. "You could have hurt the assassin more severely." "Because he was just doing his job," Kale said simply. "He wasn't my enemy. Your council was testing me, not trying to actually murder me. If I had seriously injured someone just following orders, I would have proven their point, that humans are too emotional and unpredictable to be trusted." Over the following weeks, Lyra began to understand something fundamental about her husband. The Celestial Council had measured him by their own standards and found him lacking. But Kale did not operate by celestial standards. He operated by human standards, and by those measures, he was exceptional. When the Council sent 3 more assassins, Kale survived each encounter. Not through luck, but through the same combination of intelligent thinking and physical preparation. He studied each attacker's patterns. He used the environment. He created situations where his enemy's strength became a disadvantage. After the 5th test, the Council finally stopped. They still seemed skeptical of this mortal man, but they could not deny one fact: he was still alive. What impressed Lyra more than his survival was what Kale did after each attack. He would sit down and analyze what had happened. He would write detailed reports on his attackers' training methods, their weaknesses, their strengths. We would develop countermeasures not out of fear, but out of intellectual curiosity. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, Lyra said, "You are afraid, and yet you do not show it. I'm a mortal man, surrounded by beings who could destroy me with a thought, but fear is just information. It tells you something matters. It doesn't have to paralyze you." For the first time in her 10,000 years, Lyra found herself truly impressed by a person, not by their power or their age or their titles, but by their character, by their ability to stand unflinching before impossible odds and respond with wisdom instead of panic. She was beginning to understand that her husband was not extraordinary because he was immortal. He was extraordinary because he refused to accept that mortality made him weak. The dimensional rift appeared without warning. One moment, the galaxy was functioning normally. The next, a tear in the fabric of space itself opened near the Andromeda sector, expanding at a rate that defied all mathematical predictions. Within hours, entire star systems began experiencing gravitational anomalies. Ships lost power. Planets started experiencing earthquakes. Scientists estimated that within weeks, the rift would consume 17 inhabited worlds, killing billions of people across multiple species. The Celestial Council convened an emergency session. Lyra stood in the chamber as ancient immortal beings, each one possessing power that had shaped civilizations, discussed solutions. They had faced dimensional rifts before, they said. They knew the theoretical magic required to seal such a phenomenon. The problem was that their magic seemed useless against this particular rift. Every spell they attempted, every magical formula they used, simply passed through the dimensional tier without effect. "We will attempt a ritual of binding," one ancient lord declared. "If we gather enough celestial power in one location, we can force the rift closed through sheer magical force." That approach has never worked on dimensional phenomena, another celestial argued. The rift exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our 3-dimensional magic cannot affect it properly. Accordingly, the debate continued for hours. No one had a real solution. They had power, certainly, but power alone could not solve this problem. Lyra thought of Kale. She found him in the research sector of the palace. where he had been given permission to study celestial scientific records. When she explained the crisis, Kale did not panic. He did not express despair. Instead, he asked questions. What exactly happens when your magic meets the rift? He asked, pulling up holographic displays of the dimensional tier. It passes through without interaction, a celestial scientist explained, frustrated. As if the magic does not exist in the same dimensional space as the rift. Then don't fight it, Kale said simply. Work with it. What do you mean? Lyra asked. I mean, instead of trying to close it with magic alone, what if you combined your magical understanding with human scientific engineering? We have dimensional mathematics. Human physicists develop them without magic. And you have magical theory. What if you created a hybrid approach? Use your magic to understand the rift structure, and use human mathematics to calculate the exact frequencies needed to destabilize it from within. The celestial scientists exchanged glances that suggested they thought Kale was insane. That would require inventing entirely new technology, one of them said, merging disciplines that have never been combined. The risk of failure is catastrophic. The risk of doing nothing is also catastrophic, Kale pointed out. Billions of people will die either way. You might as well try something new. The ancient immortals had solved problems for thousands of years using their own methods. The idea of learning from humans, from a species that lived only decades, seemed absurd, but Lyra stood before them. We will attempt this approach, she announced. My husband's solution will be tested. What followed was the most intense period of Kale's life. He worked with celestial scientists, engineers, and magical theorists, trying to find a way to merge two completely different approaches to problem solving. The humans contributed mathematical models and engineering principles. The Celestials contributed magical theory and dimensional understanding. Kale barely slept. He worked for 16, 18, sometimes 20 hours straight, moving between research stations, analyzing data, proposing solutions. His human body, which had centuries of advantage in neither strength nor magical power, began to show the strain. His hands developed tremors from constant work. His eyes grew dark with exhaustion, but his mind remained sharp. One critical moment came when the mathematical models suggested that the magical frequencies needed were impossible to achieve. The equations showed that the energy required would overload any magical resonator they could build. Kale stared at the calculations for 6 hours straight. Then he saw it. We don't need a single powerful burst, he said, his voice hoarse from not speaking. We need a series of precisely timed pulses, each one slightly weaker than the last, but coordinated across multiple dimensional points. It's like tuning a musical instrument. You don't smash it with a hammer. You adjust each string carefully. The celestial scientist checked his work. The mathematics was correct. It would work. The day of the final attempt, Kale collapsed from exhaustion just as the project reached completion. Lyra found him unconscious in the research center, surrounded by notes and calculations, his body pushed beyond its limits. She held him carefully, aware that his mortality made him fragile in ways immortal beings never were. When Kale woke, weak but conscious, the first thing Lyra told him was that his solution had worked. The coordinated pulse frequencies were being transmitted toward the dimensional rift. Early reports suggested the tier was becoming unstable, beginning to collapse inward. How long did I sleep? Kale asked weakly. 12 hours, Lyra said. Your body needed rest. Did they implement the full sequence? Yes. And Kale? Lyra paused, her ancient silver eyes filled with something he had never seen before. It is working. The rift is closing. Billions of people are being saved because of your idea. Kyle tried to smile, but exhaustion pulled him under again. Over the next 3 days, the dimensional rift was completely sealed. The 17 worlds that were threatened were saved. Across the galaxy, news networks broadcast images of the tiers in space, slowly closing, becoming smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. And they showed the truth. It had taken both magic and science working together. It had taken celestial power and human ingenuity combining in ways neither species could have achieved alone. The Council watched as their ancient magical traditions merged with human engineering principles. They watched as a mortal man, through nothing but intelligent thinking and refusal to accept impossible odds, saved billions of lives. Lyra sat beside Kale as he recovered. She realized, watching this exhausted human sleep peacefully, that strength was not measured in centuries lived or magical power possessed. It was measured in will, in the determination to solve problems that seemed unsolvable, in the courage to stand before immortal beings and say, "There is another way." Her husband had proven something the gods had never fully understood. Mortality was not weakness, it was wisdom, earned through the urgency of limited time. The celebration lasted 3 days. Across the galaxy, every species and civilization honored the ones who had saved billions of lives. The Celestial Council, for the first time in their history, openly acknowledged that human knowledge had been essential. News broadcasts showed Kale standing beside Lyra as announcements were made about the partnership between human science and celestial magic. But in the private chambers of the palace, a different conversation was taking place. A celestial healer approached Kale with an offer that changed everything. "Your body has been pushed to its limits," the healer said respectfully. "The exhaustion from your work has caused damage that will take months to heal. But we have a gift for you. We can offer you immortality. You would live as we do, without aging, without disease, without the limitations of mortality. You could remain with the princess for eternity." Kyle stared at the healer for a long moment. Then he said, "No." "You do not wish to live forever?" "I don't," Kale said quietly. "And I need to explain why to everyone, because I think this is important." He requested a formal meeting with the Celestial Council. When he entered the chamber, every ancient being turned their attention toward him. Lyra sat at the center, her expression unreadable. "I have been offered immortality," Kale began. "The chance to live forever, to remain with Lyra as an equal, to never face the limitations of human mortality. And I want to explain why I am refusing this gift." Murmurs spread through the council. An immortal being offering immortality to a mortal was considered the highest honor. To refuse was almost insulting. "I refuse," Kyle continued, "because immortality would destroy what makes humanity valuable to this galaxy." He paused, letting that statement sink in. "You have all lived for thousands of years. You have time to wait for the perfect solution. You have time to consider every angle, every possibility. But humans? We have decades. Maybe a century if we're fortunate. And because of that limitation, we have learned something that immortal beings often forget. Urgency matters. Purpose matters. Every moment matters." Kale walked forward, speaking with the conviction of someone who had seen the fundamental difference between mortal and immortal thinking. "When I worked to solve the dimensional rift problem, I did not sleep for days. I did not take breaks to contemplate philosophy. I worked because people were dying, and I had only a limited amount of time to help them. That urgency, that awareness that my lifespan is finite, that is what drives human innovation. That is what makes us solve problems quickly instead of waiting for centuries. An ancient lord spoke up, but you could accomplish far more with immortality. You could develop greater solutions, more complex technologies, deeper understanding. But I would lose the very thing that made me useful in the first place. I would become like you, immortal, powerful, but no longer operating from the urgency that drives real change. Humans are not weak because we die. We are driven because we die." Lyra watched her husband speak with such clarity and conviction. She realized he was not just refusing a gift, he was explaining something fundamental about the difference between their species. "What do you ask instead?" the council leader asked. "I ask for something more valuable than immortality," Kale said. "I ask that humanity be recognized as partners in solving galactic problems, not helpers or servants or younger species learning from their elders. Partners. I want human philosophy, human ethics, and human problem-solving approaches to be studied and respected throughout the galaxy. I want young humans and young celestials working together on research stations, learning from each other, creating solutions that neither species could create alone. I want you to understand that strength is not measured in how long you live. It is measured in what you accomplish in the time you have." Opinion and preference, but they could not argue with the results. A mortal man, thinking like a mortal, had solved a problem that immortal beings with vast magical power could not solve alone. They agreed to Kale's request. That night, Lyra found her husband standing alone in the observation chamber, looking out at the stars. She moved beside him silently. "You could have accepted immortality," she said. "You could have remained with me forever." "I know," Kale replied, "but forever would have changed me into something I don't want to become. And besides," he turned to look at her, "you asked me once how humans survive knowing we will die. The answer is that we don't survive it. We embrace it. We love fiercely because love is temporary. We create meaning because time is limited. We solve problems quickly because we know we won't be around to solve them slowly." Lyra felt tears forming in her ancient eyes. In 10,000 years, she had never truly understood mortality. She had always seen it as a tragedy, a flaw in lesser beings. But looking at her husband now, she understood something different. "How long will you live?" she asked softly. "Probably 50 or 60 more years if I'm lucky," Kal said. "Maybe less, depending on what work I do. I won't see the distant future you will see. I won't watch civilizations grow and change across centuries." "Then what will you do?" Lyra asked.
I'll do what humans do best.
Kale said, taking her hand. "I'll work hard, love deeply, and try to make sure that whatever I leave behind makes the galaxy better than it was before I arrived." Over the following months, the changes began. Human scientists were invited to celestial research stations. Celestial magic theorists studied with human engineers. Universities on human worlds began teaching celestial philosophy. And slowly, the galaxy began to understand that strength came in different forms. Some beings possessed power that could reshape worlds, but humans possessed something equally valuable: the wisdom that came from living with the awareness of mortality, the understanding that time was precious, the drive to accomplish important things before their brief lives ended. Lyra realized, as she watched her husband age slightly with each passing year, that she had married not just a man, but a teacher. He was showing the entire galaxy something they had never truly learned: that mortality was not weakness, it was the source of humanity's greatest strength. 53 years had passed since Kale first walked into the Celestial Palace. His hair, once dark brown, had turned completely gray. Lines marked his face, the map of a life fully lived, of countless decisions made and problems solved. His hands, still capable despite their age, trembled slightly when he held documents, but his eyes remained clear, sharp, filled with the same intelligence that had first impressed Lyra all those decades ago. The Galactic Assembly Chamber was filled with representatives from 1,000 different species. Humans stood alongside Celestials. Beings of pure energy floated near creatures of solid crystal. Some delegates were ancient beyond measure. Others were young, seeing their first Galactic Council. And at the center of it all stood Kyle, preparing to present the final treaty. Lyra sat in the position of honor, still appearing exactly as she had 53 years ago. Immortality meant her face would never change, her body would never weaken. But her eyes had changed. They had learned something new. They had learned to value the finite. For over 50 years, Kale began, his voice still strong despite his aging body. "Humans and Celestials have worked together. We have solved problems. We have created technologies. We have learned from each other. And today, I am honored to present a treaty that will change the structure of galactic governance forever." It activated the holographic display. Words appeared in 1,000 different languages simultaneously, the work of translation technology that had been developed through cooperation between human and celestial engineers. "This treaty recognizes humanity as full partners in celestial governance," Kale explained. "Not as helpers or students or younger species still learning the ways of the galaxy, but as equals. As beings whose perspective, whose wisdom, whose approach to problems is essential to the future of all civilizations." The chamber erupted in discussion. Some species protested, others celebrated. But the majority of delegates understood what Kale was proposing: a fundamental shift in how the galaxy understood power and wisdom. An ancient celestial lord, one of the same beings who had originally ordered tests to determine Kale's worth, stood to speak. "This human has proven something we immortal beings had forgotten," the Lord said solemnly. "Strength is not measured in centuries lived or magical power possessed. It is measured in the courage to stand before impossible odds and respond with wisdom. Humanity has taught us that mortality is not weakness. It is the source of urgency, of purpose, of the fierce drive to accomplish important things before time runs out. The treaty was passed with overwhelming support. In the years that followed, the changes accelerated. Human universities became centers of learning that attracted scholars from across the galaxy. Humans and Celestials worked side by side on space stations, developing new technologies that neither species could have created alone. Young humans learned magical theory from immortal teachers. Young Celestials learned human philosophy from mortal professors who understood that every moment mattered. But Kale's health continued to decline. He worked until his body could no longer keep pace with his mind. He submitted research papers from his bed. He conducted video conferences with scientists across the galaxy, even as his voice grew weaker. At 78 years old, Kale finally had to accept that his time was running out. Lyra sat beside him in their private chambers, as she had so many times before. But this time felt different. This time was the beginning of an ending she had known would come for decades, but had never truly prepared herself to face. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Refusing immortality? You could have lived to see so much more." "I see everything I need to see," Kale said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see a galaxy that understands humans are valuable. I see young people from Earth working alongside Celestials on research that will help billions. I see my ideas living on in people I'll never meet, solving problems I'll never know about. That is immortality, Lyra. Not living forever. It is living in the legacy you leave behind." He squeezed her hand with the little strength remaining to him. "And I see you, the woman I married all those years ago, who thought she was marrying a weak mortal. You learned that mortality was not weakness. You learned to value the time we had together, instead of seeing it as a tragedy that it would end. That is the greatest gift you could have given me." 3 weeks later, Kale passed away peacefully, with Lyra holding his hand. The funeral was attended by representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. Humans from Earth came to honor one of their greatest. Celestials attended to acknowledge a teacher who had changed their understanding of strength. Beings of all kinds gathered to mourn the loss of someone who had fundamentally transformed how the galaxy worked together. But Lyra did not mourn in sorrow alone. She mourned in celebration of a life fully lived. Kale had not been immortal, but he had accomplished more in his 78 years than many beings accomplished in 10,000. 5 years after Kale's death, Lyra stood before the Galactic Assembly once more. She unveiled a monument, a statue of Kale standing with his hand outstretched, not commanding or ordering, but inviting others to join him in creating something greater than themselves. "My husband taught me something I never would have learned in 10,000 years of immortality," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the emotions beneath it. "He taught me that strength is not measured in lifespan. It is measured in will, in ingenuity, in the courage to stand for something larger than yourself." He refused immortality because he understood that mortality was not a weakness to overcome. It was a gift that made every moment precious. She looked out at the assembly, seeing humans and Celestials working together, seeing young beings of all species learning from each other. "Humanity is no longer seen as the galaxy's young, fragile species," she continued. "We recognize them now as the species that refused to accept the limits others placed on them. The species that dared to suggest equality to immortal beings. The species that proved, through action and determination and brilliant thinking, that mortality could be a source of wisdom rather than weakness." Lyra paused, looking up at the statue of her husband. "Kale once told me that humans survive mortality by embracing it. We love fiercely because love is temporary. We create meaning because time is limited. We solve problems quickly because we know we won't be around to solve them slowly. That is humanity's greatest strength, and that is the legacy my husband left for all of us, immortal and mortal alike." The assembly fell silent, honoring not just a single man, but the entire species he had represented. And in that silence, humanity's place in the galaxy was finally fully acknowledged. Across the stars, in research stations and universities and government buildings, humans and Celestials continued the work Kale had started. They solved problems together. They learned from each other. And they understood finally that the most powerful force in the galaxy was not immortality or magic or technology alone. It was the partnership between beings who understood that every moment mattered.